Let's talk.
John Brown.
Everybody counts. Abetted by gangs of people smugglers, today human trafficking is the fastest growing criminal industry in the world. It is the subject of a fascinating and disturbing new study by international journalist Barbie Latza Nadeau. I'm delighted to say that Barbie joins us live on the line from Rome now. Barbie, good morning to you.
Good morning.
There was a report this morning as I was driving on into my work about this being the most dangerous year for migrants. I think it was some 9,000 the past year have been killed. That's not just, of course, in the Mediterranean. That includes Mexico coming over from Syria, etc., etc. And we have a very strange and disturbing relationship, don't we, with people who are trying to get predominantly, I suppose, where we are, into Europe.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that when we think about human trafficking, we always assume it's just migrants, desperate migrants trying to get to Europe or trying to get to the United States. But in the reality, they are the easiest to spot. They're the easiest to identify because they're the most vulnerable. They're sort of a commodity that is readily available to human traffickers. But trafficking in general, I've found is far more prevalent in sort of the wealthy societies where people are trafficking their domestic help or organ trafficking or, the selling of corneas and kidneys and all of these sorts of things. Migration is a huge sort of a supply when it comes to supply and demand. Migrants are the supply, but the demand is far greater than the migrants could ever fill.
And the other thing is the fact that this, if you are trying to cross into a border, and you maybe don't have the time, you don't have the knowledge, you don't have the money to make it legally, then you are kind of on the, and trying to put this in a nice way, you are the lowest on the food chain, aren't you, basically? People will abuse you, and we just talking, organ transplants perhaps are modern slavery, and then there's prostitution and drug running, drug mills, etc. These are people who are just open to abuse.
Yeah, it's not that they're asking for it, obviously not, but they are desperate. And so human traffickers feed on desperation. If you're trying to cross from France into the UK, if you're trying to cross into Spain, if you're trying to cross into Italy, lots of times by the time you reach the place from which you need to cross, you don't have any money. You've been abused emotionally, sexually, the whole way through from your your original destination, or for your original, the place from which you're leaving before you reach your destination. And that desperation basically falls into the hands of the human traffickers. And these are people who present themselves as sort of helpful travel agent kind of mentality, saying, we can get you across to Italy. Yeah. And then I can get you a job as a babysitter. I can get you a job as a hair braider. This happens with a lot of the Nigerian women, especially. We can help you. We'll pay for it. And then you'll just be able to pay us back when you get over to the other side. And that's sort of the classic trap. And so someone says, okay, yes, I just need to make it. I need to join my family. I need to do this. I need to do that. And they say, okay, sure, help me. And that is when they almost willingly walk right into the trap. But desperation is sort of there's a kind of a cloud in terms of your own lucidity, in terms of what you know is right and wrong. Because by the time you fall into the hands of the trafficker, generally speaking, you've lost hope. And so they give you that hope, and the deal is sealed.
Yeah, and also it's not only the fact, because you may have trekked sort of 3,000 miles, including from a war-torn area across the Sahara for 8 or 9 days. You've been stuck in Tangier outside Ceuta or Melilla for another sort of 2 or 3 years. You may not have been able to get to a government agency to help you. So these people will very much seem like your fuel tank, your emotional, financial, and intellectual fuel tank is absolutely empty at this point. You can almost see it. It is like the land of Oz there, and you just go, just get me over there, and I'll work it out when I get over the other side.
Yeah, and I mean, and the traffickers know that. I mean, they're watching for these people who are at that desperate level. You know, they know exactly what they're looking for. And this whole idea of human trafficking being sort of random, it's not. It's very, very, very planned out. There is a definite supply and demand issue. Okay, we need some Nigerian women for prostitution in Italy. We need some domestic workers in the UK. We need a few kidneys in Spain. You know, it can be that. And it's like there are these hierarchies. There's the trafficker who never gets his or her hands dirty. Then there are the brokers and the sorts of agents. Those are the people who find the supply, right? And so they may go to a port in Spain or to a port in Italy where migrants have just been rescued and arrived. And they're just sort of looking across that crowd for what they need. And those people then don't want to go into a refugee camp. They don't want to go into, the long lines of processing their requests for asylum, especially here in Europe right now, and especially in the United States, where things are clamping down, where it is so hard to get asylum, where governments are turning, to the right at a fairly brisk pace, let's say. And these traffickers and the brokers working for them offer a solution.
Because the thing is, you see, we have this stereotype, don't we? I mean, we have this thing of and apologies to my Albanian friends. Ellis, good morning to you, who may be listening. But they, if you read certain sections of the media, you think these are all sort of swarthy Central Europeans with sort of like pop-up boats who just throw you on board to pick up a couple of, $1,000 or whatever, and then that's it. But Barbie, it is this industry has been going on under one guise or another since slavery, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is not a new phenomenon. The whole thing that has, I think, kind of made the turning point was probably COVID. We've seen a lot of new ways people are trafficking people. We've got sort of, cyber trafficking, which is the new frontier. People being forced to work in call centers and to exploit elderly people, trying to get money from them. During COVID, there wasn't a lot of movement of people. And so we saw here in Italy on a couple of occasions, the traffickers were basically picking up migrants off the streets under the guise of delivery trucks because they were the only vehicles that could go out. And so they were, taking people, almost kidnapping young girls especially, and getting them into the forced sex industry. But we saw also during COVID, when everybody was locked down, this sort of new need to sort of go all high tech with the trafficking. And so you had a whole new kind of window of opportunity for cyber trafficking, which I think is a terrifying new opportunity because it's harder to find the victims. And so often, when you come to like cyber trafficking, you've got the trafficked people committing crimes, and so they're first criminals before they're victims. But you also have that in migration. If someone comes into the country, any country in Europe or in the United States or where have you, illegally, let's say, even though I hate that word in terms of migration, but they come in, sort of under irregular migration, they're treated first as a migrant who broke the law, even if they're a victim of trafficking. And that's where, people fall through the cracks, and that's why, it continues.
I can kind of get my head around this is the idea of women especially being picked up and trafficked for sex, for brothels, etc., etc. I can understand the using people as drug mules because I did a lot of work with prisons and whatever, and there were the women's prisons are full of women who have been forced to fly from Jamaica and stuff like that as drug mules, but if you're saying they're working in call centers and cyber, and for many people this will really open some eyes, because that means that there are companies and institutions who are well aware of where these people came from. Now, I'm not saying they are working in the office because, politicians love the word gig economy, sexy new tech. So we can outsource this to anywhere in the world. So what are we saying here, that Barbie, that people with certain skills are being picked up and trafficked, and then they're in industrial units in the middle of, I don't know, the outskirts of Slovenia, Hungary, or what, so somewhere in Europe, and then they're being forced to work in call centers or in high tech, and obviously, because we don't care whether we think it's all a fashion, a glamorous industry. But in fact, the people who bring in the lowest costs, the service providers, are using basically trafficked people who, have got no rights.
Yeah, I mean, there are these click farms, is what they're called in certain, they're in Eastern Europe, they're in Asia, they're probably all around us and we don't know it. That's the problem with a lot of the trafficking. We don't know. It could be just, in our own backyard. But what happened during COVID is a lot of people who didn't have regular employment were desperate. And so they answered these job advertisements to say, yeah, I can make money from home. We've all seen those come up on our feeds. Make money from home, make it, And there were a lot of people who, very rightfully so, applied for those jobs, took those jobs, started, working from home. Then once COVID was over, once the lockdowns lifted, they were enticed to come work on site. And, there are so many examples of people who went, especially in Asia, to these click farms, not knowing, they thought that they were going to some sort of, legitimate place to work. And in fact, they end up being held as really slaves and prisoners almost. And they're forced to commit crimes for less than legitimate companies and legitimate companies. And it's impossible for them to leave because they had to pay for their transportation. They have to pay rent to where they live. They have to pay for their electricity. And this whole thing becomes this trap they can't get out of. And because on so many levels, they're committing crimes. They are exploiting, you have these, it's called pig fattening, where you pretend to be in love with someone you meet on an online dating site and then you bilk them for all the money that they have. And that money doesn't go to the person who's making the call. It goes to someone else. It's just the kind of classic trafficking. And we're seeing more and more examples of this. But the person who is being victimized is committing a crime and trying to convince someone to give them their money. They can't then say, by the way, I'm being trafficked. Can you help me? There's just no way out of that. And it's just it's kind of a crazy new trafficking cycle that I think it's just coming on the radar now. People are just understanding it.
And also not only that, but obviously the people you're working for are incredibly nasty. There's been this whole, and it really annoys me, having been on the receiving end of some criminals on various times. People's, ever since sort of the Mockney thing and Gore Blimey Geezer and Scorsese brings another mafia film out and we all think they're all gentlemen, the whole thing. These people are particularly nasty and we're dealing, and you're sitting in Rome, so we know the Camorra and obviously the Naples connection, stuff like that. These aren't people you go, okay, well, I really don't like to be here, and so I'm going I'm just going to walk out that door, because we know all about prostitute. We young women who are sold into sex slavery and then have their passports taken away. But the same thing will apply in any form of this, even if you are working as whatever you're doing, isn't it?
Yeah, even if you're working, let's say, as a babysitter in Washington, D.C. or Geneva, we've seen many cases where diplomats have trafficked their help, their household help, their domestic workers, take their passports, don't pay them enough, make them work ridiculous hours. But because they're in a country under diplomatic status, the person, not hiring, I guess, but exploiting, it's really hard for them to be held accountable too. It's sort of everywhere. If you were to look around, walk down any street, the people who were working in nail bars, in massage parlors, people who are babysitters, people who are, maybe sort of high-end call girls, all of the things that may seem legitimate or at least a choice maybe aren't. Mm. And I think that's sort of the purpose of the book, is to try to make us all feel complicit. We all know, we're all walking by it every day. Who's doing your nails? Who's giving you a massage? Are they free?
Yeah, if you just look at again, I'm based in Marbella. A lot of people from Marbella go over to the Gulf States, Dubai, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia. Everybody goes on about sports washing and the whole thing, but you think about, and it's not as if this is not known. This is hiding in plain sight. The World Cup we just had over there, and the fact that there are hundreds of thousands of Filipino, Pakistani, Indian subcontinent workers there who get their passports taken away, who are sitting in inhumane conditions, living in dormitories with no air conditioning, etc., forced to work from sunrise to sunset. And in any definition, that if you were to do that to one of Pharaoh's lot building the pyramids, you say, hang on a second, that's a little bit unfair.
Yeah, but we're watching it. You and I are talking about this. it's somebody else. It's a problem. It's a travesty. It's terrible. But the fact that we know about it, the fact that law enforcement knows about it, the fact that everybody knows about it is the real crime, really. I mean, I did a book a few years ago specifically on Nigerian women and sex trafficking in Italy, a kind of a niche book, let's say. And I went out with an undercover police officer once, who was going on the streets and explaining to me that as long as the girls are on the street, it means that the whole criminal enterprise is kind of in the status quo. The girls disappear. That means that there's some kind of gang warfare going on underneath. And I'm thinking to the police officer, you know that 14-year-old girl isn't there by choice. Why can't we save her? Why don't we save them? We know it. Why don't we do something?
Because we dehumanize migrants. They are as I said before, they are the lowest on the food chain. If you're a migrant, I get this when people come, we call them looky men on the beaches of the Costa del Sol, and they come up and they're normally from Senegal, yeah? And they rock up and they are trying to sell trinkets on the beach or offering, and I remember with some very well-heeled friends sitting in a very posh beach bar, and the guy wanted to sell me a hat. I needed a hat, and he said, how much? He said, 20 euros. I said, there you go, 20 euros. And my friend, no, why are you giving him 20 euros? It's like, listen, if you had walked across the Sahara, then that is none. And and when people arrive here, and if they're young black males or they're young males because they've managed to walk from Afghanistan, they get demonized. Oh my goodness, they just want to rape and pillage, etc., etc. So we let this go away because they don't vote, they don't mean anything. So therefore, they're not on they are from our personal standpoint. Yeah, okay, they're just a bunch of bleeding migrants. And from a political standpoint, and you are in Rome and I'm in southern Spain where Vox has been on the rise, and let's not even talk about what's happening over the pond. It is, I want to demonize somebody, that lot. They're taking your jobs. They are the ones who are eating your dogs, eating your cats, raping your budgerigar, whatever. And because they have no voice, they are the easiest targets in the world.
Yeah, I mean, and they're treated like criminals even if they are being trafficked. And so the guy who's selling you a hat in Spain, does he get the 20 euro or whatever? What's his profit margin? Probably nothing. Maybe a place to stay. He's selling the hat for someone else, almost undoubtedly. You see people who we see it in Rome all the time, people selling roses and things like that in the evenings to the tourists. They're not getting the profit of that. They're working under some guise in which they are not free. They are not allowed to keep the money themselves, whether they're selling sex, roses, hats, kidneys, corneas, whatever it may be. There's always someone making the big money on this. And, you see in the United States, and as an American living in Italy or living in Europe, let's say, I'm watching in the United States and you see these deportation flights going to prisons in Central and South America. And you think, how many of those people on those flights are just going to be handed over to traffickers? How many of them are, sure, there are probably criminals among every group, right? There are good people there. There's like a demographic, I'm sure. I know. And then you just think, okay, you're just handing people over as if they're not human. Because as you say, people who are desperate are somehow, they are stripped not only of their rights, they're stripped of their I don't know, of their humanness, of their humanity. And again, we watch it, we're discussing it, and we know it. And that bothers me. And I think it bothers you, and I think it bothers a lot of people that there's nothing you can do to sort of equalize. We were born here, they were born there, we're all still human. And there's this just idea that desperation somehow cancels out your right to be treated with respect. Just
briefly, because I only got 5 minutes or so left, but we've talked about cornea, we're talking about kidneys and transplant. We have always thought that's kind of almost like an urban myth, isn't it? You wake up after 3 days at Carnival in Brazil and you're missing a kidney. But and I apologize for those of you who are finishing your cafe con leche this morning, but how does that operate? And where are we talking about a black market that goes into health services? Are we talking about private hospitals? How is that operating?
Well, there was a big case in the UK a few years ago where this diplomat, basically, they're serving time in prison right now for this, but their daughter was on a kidney waiting list. She had kidney disease. She's on a kidney waiting list. They turn up at the hospital. There's a legitimate kidney waiting list. They come up turn up at the hospital with a cousin and they were from Nigeria. They come up with a cousin. The diplomats are like, this is cousin whoever. He's going to donate his kidney, right? And so then you don't have to, you bring in your donor. You can skip the line, right? You don't have to wait. And so during the interview process, the hospital realized that first, it wasn't a cousin. He wasn't even from Nigeria. He was from somewhere else. Second of all, he didn't know even the basic details about the family. And then they realized that he was basically had been brought in and promised all sorts of, documents, and you'll get residency in the UK and you'll get citizenship if you just give your kidney, right? At the end of the day, he didn't, his kidney wasn't taken. It wasn't transplanted into the daughter, to the young woman who's still on the waiting list, by the way. But the doctor who was facilitating all this is in prison now. The parents who paid for the kidney are in prison right now. But that's a case that everybody knows about. How many cases? The World Health Organization estimates that 15% of all kidney transplants are trafficked in some way. And I'll bring the cousin in. We've all seen this too on our social media feeds, my desperate wife or husband is in need of a kidney. Does anyone want to donate? Does anyone, there's a lot of gray area in that, let's say.
And just quickly, fashion houses. How are fashion houses linked to this?
Well, we see this in Italy. There are, a couple of big cases going on right now with major fashion houses in terms of investigating their supply chain. We see outside of Florence here in the town of Prato that there are these Chinese factories that traffic in slave labor, essentially, make them work to sew the lace that may end up on a major fashion brand collar or something like that. And those people are being trafficked for labor, but we also see in third world countries, factories that everyone uses in their supply chain that are not paying the people who are working, the children, the little kids who are sewing the lace or making the rugs or doing whatever. That's a form of slave labor. Once they move those people over, that's when it becomes trafficking. And
I suppose the thing is, we talk about social media, but if you see that fashion brand, which we get bombarded with on our social media, get this T-shirt for 10% of the price you would normally, and we go, oh look, bright shiny thing, and click buy, and yet of course we don't think about how that's being manufactured, or how, I don't like Nike sneakers because they've got a sweatshop in China, but we don't even think about these discount labels that or what can be coming, because it's the internet, it's a different thing.
Yeah, no, I mean, fast fashion is where a lot of this happens, cheap disposable fashion. And the supply chain, if we really wanted to think about the supply chain of everything we're wearing, everything we're using, the first place we need to start is our cell phones and look at those batteries, where they come from.
Okay, I can talk to you to this about till Wednesday. I'm going to run out of time. But Barbie, if people want to find you online, where's the best place to find you?
I have all my feeds are the same, BLNADEAU. I'm on Twitter, Threads, Blue Sky, Instagram, everywhere.
And you can order the book via our own virtual bookstore. Thank you so much for your time today.